No! God! No! God, please, no! 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 No!
Well, it looks like Spider-Man is out of the MCU. Now, there have been many instances over the decades of popular film franchises and characters appearing alongside one another in crossover movies. However, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this might be the first time ever in the history of cinema where one series has publicly split itself apart from another one like some sort of high-profile celebrity breakup. Complete, of course, with the entire internet losing its mind and taking sides, even up to and including cast members and their families. And I think the whole thing is pretty ridiculous. Now please indulge me as I do exactly the same thing. First though, a quick bit of background for those who may not be familiar with all of the baggage leading up to this situation. In the 1990s, Marvel Comics was on the verge of bankruptcy. They managed to stay afloat though by selling the film rights for most of their franchises to various movie studios, many of which carried expiration dates stipulating that the rights would revert back to Marvel if a quota of films produced over a certain length of time was not met. Most of these rights did eventually expire or otherwise make their way back to Marvel, but the two biggest franchises sold, X-Men and Spider-Man, did not. Both were adapted into movie series by 20th Century Fox and Sony, respectively, that together revitalized mainstream public interest in superhero films throughout the early to mid-2000s. However, by 2008, Marvel had fought its way back up and was in the process of planning and producing its own cinematic universe of interconnected films in-house using then C and D-list characters. This, as well as the success of Iron Man, piqued the interest of the Walt Disney Company, who bought Marvel Entertainment in 2009 and by 2012 had fully secured distribution rights to all future Marvel Studios projects, with the exception of The Incredible Hulk, which is why there hasn't been a movie with Hulk in the title since before Disney got involved. Sony, meanwhile, attempted to compete with the now wildly successful MCU using Spider-Man alone to create their own Spider-Man cinematic universe, their reasoning being that as the most popular Marvel comic series, the list of recognizable and popular side characters associated with Spider-Man was large enough that a Spider-Man-centric universe would be able to carry itself. This idea might have worked in the right hands, but TLDR, these were the wrong hands, and Sony's terrible studio interference and mismanaging tanked their rebooted Spider-Man universe just as it had Spider-Man 3 a few years before.
We have plans for you, Peter Parker.
Then in 2015, we get the famous Marvel-Sony deal, where Sony cut Disney in on the profits of yet another new iteration of Spider-Man, this time set to take place within the MCU. They did this in exchange for Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige pretty much steering the ship for them in order to salvage the character's big screen reputation among general audiences and earn back goodwill from fans. This arrangement has worked out pretty well for both of them right up until now, where it seems that Disney has elected to change the terms of the agreement with Sony, wanting to split future Spider-Man box office earnings 50-50 rather than continue on with the deal they agreed on initially.
I am altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
Sony attempted to renegotiate Disney's renegotiation, but Disney didn't budge, so Sony walked away. See, Marvel doesn't need Spider-Man anywhere near as much as Sony needs Spider-Man. It's their biggest film franchise by an enormous margin. The only other one they have that comes even close is James Bond, which Sony distributes for MGM, but besides that, you've got, like, Men in Black, Ghostbusters, Hotel Transylvania, Resident Evil, you get the picture. I mean, sure, Jumanji came out of nowhere a couple of years ago and made a boatload of money, and it was a decent movie, but how many times do you think that very specific concept can be done over again before it starts to get tiring? I mean, look, think about it this way. There's these two kids in preschool, right? Bob and Amy. Bob owns every toy in the Marvel action figure line, except for Spider-Man, the most popular one, which Amy does have, and it's her favorite toy. Amy then starts letting Bob play with Spider-Man for a few minutes at recess every day due to peer pressure because all the other kids don't like the way she plays with it. Okay, look, this isn't a perfect analogy, but the point is that now Bob is demanding that he should get to play with Spider-Man half the time for no other reason besides that he owns all the other toys and they look good as a complete set. And Amy's just sitting over here like, hey, come on, this isn't fair. You already ate Timmy and took all of his toys. How come I now have to give you more playtime with mine? Which, from where I'm standing, unless I've completely misread the situation, is a perfectly reasonable response, but for some reason that I cannot begin to fathom. Every single person on the planet seems to be blaming Sony for taking their toy back and going home with it when Disney starts to bully them. Obviously, there are a few other pertinent details here. Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige have indeed been the ones most responsible for the revitalized success of Spider-Man as a cinematic brand. These Spider-Man films look, talk, walk, and act like MCU movies through and through, for better or worse. Mostly for better. And at this point, you may just be thinking, well, Sony should have already sold Marvel back Spider-Man years ago. And yeah, I'm sure that option has probably been floated around at some point, except like I said, Sony needs Spider-Man a heck of a lot more than Disney does. To Disney, Spider-Man would just be another notch on the belt, but to Sony Pictures, it's their big safety net franchise. Selling it off to another company could very likely be the studio's death knell. I'm no businessman, but if I'm a higher up on Sony's corporate ladder and Disney asks to buy Spider-Man back off of me, my response is, okay, fine, but then you've got to take all of Sony Pictures along with it. I don't think anybody wants that though, including Disney for the time being anyway. They just got finished purchasing 20th Century Fox and just recently scrapped a whole ton of Fox pictures that were in pre-production. Anyone still think we're ever gonna see New Mutants? Now, look, with all of that said, even though I don't really blame Sony for how this all shook out, I also don't really have any confidence that it'll be anything but bad for the Spider-Man franchise moving forward. No, Sony is on the hook for an entirely different reason. While I've spent a lot of time recently taking Disney to task over its creative decisions, or rather lack thereof, and this won't be the last, one thing I will absolutely say about them is that they do know how to make a good movie, or at the very least, they usually have the wherewithal to put the right people in key positions and let them make good movies. Most of the time. Sony, on the other hand? Sony is an electronic hardware company that bought up a couple of movie studios and has just been riding the wave of a few successful big hits ever since then. They're pretty much the laughingstock of the entire film industry.
On with the scripted portion of our program, the impromptu words that have been written for me by a lowly Sony marketing executive. Everywhere I turn in this world, I see the name Sony. Sony, Sony, Sony. Download a few books onto my digital reader, the Sony digital reader. They write the lies, but I tell the truth. Look, I look at the teleprompter and it's Sony teleprompters.
Sony Pictures has demonstrated time and time again that whenever their studio heads get involved with any major decision making as it pertains to their films, especially when it comes to their part within bigger franchises, the results are bad. Truthfully, I have no idea how Into the Spider-Verse made it all the way through production without Sony's big splotchy fingerprints getting all over it. I mean, for f***'s sake, this is the same company that was having serious talks for years about crossing over the Men in Black series with 21 Jump Street. So with all that in mind, here's how I see this whole Spider-Man situation moving on from here, assuming Disney doesn't just do the right thing and backpedal on everything within the next couple of months like they did when they fired James Gunn. Rebooting Spider-Man for the fourth time in less than 2 decades would be an even bigger PR disaster for Sony than this is, and Tom Holland is still under contract for 2 more Spider-Man films, so I'm predicting that they'll just continue the Spider-Man home _ series as if it never had any connection to the MCU to begin with, at least until Holland's contract is up. Characters like Tony Stark, the Avengers, Nick Fury, and Happy Hogan will never be seen, heard from, or even mentioned again. In the meantime, I wouldn't at all be surprised to see the next one of these things feature Holland's Spider-Man crossing over with the 2018 Venom film, a movie which, despite making a bunch of money, was, generously speaking, kind of... Venom's post-credit scene teased the introduction of Woody Harrelson as Carnage, so just take a wild guess how that one's gonna go.
There's gonna be carnage.
Spider-Man and Venom will start out as enemies, they're gonna fight, have some sort of misunderstanding. Spider-Man will get 2 or 3 scenes where he's wearing the black suit, they'll do some sort of variation on the bell tower scene, and then they're gonna realize that there was just a big misunderstanding and they're gonna put aside their differences and team up to fight Carnage at the end, and I don't know, maybe they'll throw in Toxin or some other stupid shit. You can consider that an official prediction. I'm also guessing that we're gonna see them lean super duper hard into the concept of the Spider-Man multiverse films featured in Into the Spider-Verse, which was actually a really fantastic movie, by the way. Check out my review here. We'll probably get some kind of crossover between all of the big screen Spider-Men, past and present, or maybe even some multiverse-y, retcon-y shenanigans that alter certain plot points from the previous films to make them easier for Sony to write sequels around. You know, like the entire ending of Far From Home. Come to think of it, the MCU is also about to introduce alternate timelines and mirror universes and stuff to its lore as well, so that could honestly make a pretty easy out if/when Spider-Man eventually makes his way back to the MCU and they want to re-retcon any of Sony's retcons, but by that point Disney will have successfully monopolized all forms of entertainment, so that'll just be an overall bummer. Let me know down in the comments what you think the next step will be for Spider-Man, and if you enjoyed this video, help me out by hitting that like button, subscribing, and ringing the bell to stay up to date on all of my future stuff. And check out some of the other great stuff I've already got up here on my channel. Until next time, as always, thanks so much to all of you guys for watching, and take care.
I'm whatever Sony wants me to be today, Howard.